Because I want to be in the I want to be in the show.
He's swinging around.
It's like, give it.
We are live now.
Oh, great. Thanks.
I'm still upset about the secret meeting on tracks.
Not starting yet. Okay, do you guys want to do
So just a reminder,
Great name. 3 seconds. You don't want emails or anything? Website? Whatever.
You could do that during the intro.
No, just throw some right there. You're the house or else? You want to fight? Okay. I hope that's no. You might enjoy the entertainment.
So you will be
we're live, yeah. It's shutting down right now.
Is that also on the which one?
Oh, go.
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, I can show you. This is like that scene from Facebook. This is not.
Yeah.
Her face Facebook.
Do you have the one?
Maybe.
You just take a photo of the photo.
Hi everyone, good evening. We're going to get started now. Thank you all for coming. I'm Sabby Louder. I'm Student Body Vice President here at Westminster College, and we're so happy to have you here tonight. If I need to talk louder, just let me know. Just give me a signal. But first we'd like to thank the sponsors, East Liberty Park Community Organization, the Sugar House Community Council, our League of Women Voters, who are up here at the front. If you have questions, please send them up. And we've been asking for questions for a little bit now. Please make sure to identify which district you're talking about if your question is district specific. We'd also like to thank the Ballpark Community Council and Westminster College. I have Annalisa Holcomb, our VP, our new VP of Institutional Affairs, come up and give a little intro.
Hi, as she said, I'm Annalisa Holcomb. I wanted to welcome you all here tonight. Some of you might know me actually because I've been part of I was previously Director of Community Relations for a long time, been on the Sugar House community council and was on the Sugar House Chamber of Commerce. But now, as Sabby just said, I am 9 days into vice president role at the college. So, woohoo, my first official speaking engagement in that role. We're really happy to welcome you to our campus for the debate. We really believe in the importance of civic engagement at the college, and I just wanted to remind all of you about how lucky we feel here at Westminster to be in what became the Sugar House neighborhood. We've been a college since 1875, and we moved to Sugar House in 1911 when Converse Hall was built. And if any of you ever want to see some of the pictures, I have amazing pictures of Converse Hall when our campus opened onto 11th East was the entrance all the way up through campus. So our community has changed a lot since then. Back then you can actually see of the pictures, 13th East is a dirt road, and the other big building that you can see off in the distance is the prison that is located, that was at Sugar House Park, so where Sugar House Park is. So while we originated a long time ago, we now have about 3,000 students, undergraduate and graduate students, 14 graduate programs, 42 undergraduate majors, 5 schools, a brand new honors college that just started this year. And just because it's about to be winter, and it's going to be the Winter Olympics this year, I just have to tout the fact that we're really excited about that. You know, last time we had Winter Olympics in Sochi, Westminster College students made up 10% of Team USA. And if we would have been a country, we would have medaled. We would have been the 5th highest medal country if Westminster was a country. So, we've had some really great accolades lately that I'm really excited to tell you about. U.S. News & World Report, again, ranked us 23rd year in a row. We're now number 19 in the West in colleges, and we're number 8 in the nation for the work we do with veterans. We're number 8 in the nation, which some of our Utah folks don't believe, but we're number 8 in the nation for best value school. And we're a value because we have a sticker price that you all see. It's not what people pay. We have amazing scholarships at the college. And in addition, I just have to say one of the most recent accolades that we received from Business Insider was one of the top 25 schools in the country to attend if you want to change the world. And we believe that our students are absolutely doing that. I think that we're incredibly proud of our student body vice president, Sabby, who's here tonight moderating, Nicole, who has been working really hard on this project. I'm really proud to get to work with our students, and that whole Change the World thing, as we know, starts in our local community. Our students dedicate 100,000 hours of community service right here in Sugar House every year, and because it starts in our community, we're really happy to support this debate because to all of you who are here tonight, to George and Erin and Amy and Abe, thank you for the work that you're doing in our community. It's very important, and we're proud to be part of it. So thank you.
I feel like Annalisa just gave me, like Westminster students, me a lot to live up to, so hopefully I don't stutter. But okay, so first I'm going to explain how the debate will work. Our League of Women Voters of Salt Lake up here will be collecting questions, as I mentioned earlier, so just send them up as they come to you. We've had some, people had sent some in before, so now we're just collecting some from the audience. And again, if it's district specific, please let me know. We are also going to have a setup where, sorry, I got lost a little bit. Okay, so candidates will have 90 seconds to talk. First, we're going to have them introduce themselves in a second, and then after that, we'll start with the questions. Then at the time remaining, we're going to have someone tell us, we have our timekeepers up here, we'll have like a 30-minute mark, and then a 1-minute mark, and then time. So then after that, candidates will be asked to answer questions in a rotating order. So we're going to start with George at the very end, and then we're going to make our way through, and it's always just going to be rotating through. Then let me see if there's anything else I'm missing. The formal debate will last until 8:30, and then after that, you're free to talk to candidates in the hall until 9. So I guess we will get started. George, if you could start with introducing yourself, just your name, and then when we get down to Abe, they'll each have 30 seconds, a minute and 30 seconds to tell us what their qualifications are and why they're running.
Okay, you want name and qualifications?
No, just your name. Just your name first down this way.
Chapman.
And can you tell me what district you're from too?
Oh, District 5.
Erin Mendenhall, District 5.
Amy Fowler, District 7.
And I'm Abe Smith, District 7.
Okay, and then with Abe, you'll start with getting 90 seconds, and then you'll be giving us our qualifications.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I was ready for 5 and then 2, now 9. All right, here we go.
Good luck,
So,
you can
a
do
bit
it.
about me. I'm Abe Smith, born in Oklahoma, grew up in Arkansas, went to school in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown and studied international business, and now live here in Salt Lake with my wife and 2 girls who are with me tonight. I think they're more nervous for me than I am. My career took me to many places. Central Asia, where I saw how poor governance can impact people. Lived in the Maldives Islands, where I saw the effects of climate change, lack of transportation, what that does to economic development. Lived in Nepal, where we saw how lack of investment in infrastructure can impact people. And I got involved as I started seeing some of these same things in my neighborhood. And I think we're facing some of those same challenges. And I hope to be able to articulate tonight and through the campaign about how those experiences that I've had, both around the world and in business, will be able to help solve some of these problems here in Salt Lake on the City Council. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm Amy Fowler. I live in Sugar House. I've lived in Sugar House for about 8 years now. I grew up here in Utah and went to law school at the University of Utah. I am now a public defender, and I was telling somebody earlier, I think that being a poor public servant must just be in my DNA. So that's part of why I decided to run for office. The other part of why I decided to run is actually, I was at an event for an organization I started earlier before coming here, and somebody said, why in the world would you do this? It's a thankless job where everybody's only complaining, and you are deciding to put yourself out there and do this. And I laughed and made a joke about, being, I don't know, and kind of sat there for a minute with this. And then it was actually something I said to him, and I'm glad Annalisa brought this up. I truly, truly believe that one person can change the world. And I've been working towards that goal my entire life. And I do that as a public defender, and I hope to do that as a city council person. And I believe that we need strong voices, strong, independent, reasonable voices out there representing our communities. And that is how we actually change the world. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, and sorry to interrupt, but could you all just make sure to speak into the microphone, please, so everyone can hear you. Sorry, I know they're a little tall.
That's okay. I'm just short.
Hi, I'm Erin Mendenhall, as I said before. My background is in environmental policy. I have a bachelor's in gender studies, which there is no job description requesting out there in the world. And I'm working now on my master's in environmental, actually in science and technology in the environmental policy track. I started as just a community organizer, and I got passionate about air quality and changing our air quality. I worked with Utah Moms for Clean Air about 10 years ago. And then split to help form Breathe Utah. I hope that's a nonprofit you're familiar with. We've worked hard for about 9 years now on state policy and education in the state. And as I worked as a policy director there and doing other forms of advocacy, I learned really how much we can get done at the city level. I think of the city council as a good neighbor position. I think it's the lowest rung in the ladder of government, and I love that about it. We really can wield some axes and get things done. And so I ran for office when Jill Remington Love said she wasn't going to run again. We'd only had one woman on the council for 10 of her 12 years, and I thought that was ridiculous. So I threw my hat in the ring, and it turns out I love to campaign. So here we sit at our last debate and my last go for city council. I'm the incumbent. I care passionately about State Street. I am eyes open about the impacts of the Operation Rio Grande, the impacts of the road home overflowing on our neighborhoods. And I'm out of time, so we'll talk more about that later.
Thank you. As if I need the microphone. I'm George Chapman. I've been an advocate for Salt Lake City taxpayers, residents, and businesses for the last almost 10 years that I've been here. I retired, and that allows me to go to most of the city council meetings, work session and formal, and a lot of the community council meetings. So I understand the city, and I love this city. But I'm trying to fight against the secret meetings that Salt Lake City Council has been involved in, including the unanimous agreement to cite the 4 homeless shelters. One of them was supposed to be here in Sugar House. I have a problem with that. Salt Lake City Council still does secret meetings. I also am running because I have a problem with the tax increases that are coming. Salt Lake City Council recently approved going on the road to essentially doubling water and sewer taxes for the next 5 years. Doubling your taxes. I have a problem with that. Salt Lake City Council is also talking about spending or raising taxes $50 million for a fancy airport tracks line instead of really considering what the public wants. And I remember a few years ago when the city taxpayers were asked if they wanted to do a public safety building. Now the city council seems to be ignoring that kind of stuff. I'm also running because I don't believe Salt Lake City actually works to help the environment. It does not protect the watershed, it cuts 3,000 trees a year, and it refuses to build restrooms in the canyon for the 6 million visitors a year.
Okay. Thank you all for that. So we're going to start with our first question down with you, George, and then we'll go Erin, Amy, Abe, and then after that, the second question will start with you, Erin. Okay? So the first question is, how would you address the lack of public participation for developments? And how would you balance public input with data to make decisions?
I am concerned that the City Council actually discourages public engagement. And that has led to a lot of development, for instance, in the super gentrification of Sugar House. So unlike the County Council, which encourages people to comment before, during the work sessions, the City Council doesn't allow any public comment during the work sessions. But they take straw polls and actually make decisions that are important for us. But when they make those decisions without any public comment, that discourages public engagement. For instance, they closed golf courses without any public hearing. When they approved or voted for the 4 shelter site funding, $11.7 million, and the affordable housing funding for $21 million, they didn't allow a public hearing. They actually jumped the gun and said, well, let's just do it now. So I have a problem with that. That discourages public engagement, and I fight for more public engagement. If you read my blog, GeorgeChapman.net, again, GeorgeChapman.net, you'll see that I've been fighting for public engagement, more public engagement for the last few years.
Thanks, George. The public engagement aspect of City Hall, we could take more than 2 minutes to talk about any one subject, but I will tell you that I bring participation to all of my community councils. I know many of you from my community council meetings, and it isn't just about, although it does include showing up to the formal meeting and making a comment in the venue that we vote in. But if any of you know me, you know that you can talk to me at the grocery store, you can stop me on the street while I'm walking home with my kids. My cell phone number is on every piece of literature and every business card I've ever handed out. I am open to phone calls, texts, emails, and I get them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we talk. So the public engagement is truly, it's up to a council member to be willing to share their information and be open to the public. So I will continue to be an open door policy. I will continue to help you find ways to advocate for what you want, even if we disagree, and I will always be honest. I've always been straightforward about what my opinion is, even when it's an unpopular one, such as the Simpson site that I was against from before the announcement was even made. I was the 1 in 7 who was against that. And I know that wasn't in my district. I didn't need to do that, but it was absolutely wrong to me that we would site a shelter there or in any neighborhood with no other partnership resources. So we can get into that more if that's one of your questions. But public engagement is intrinsic to this office. It is the lowest rung of government. You need to be able to be that good neighbor, to answer the phone on Sunday morning, and to get back to people. Thanks.
So I would echo a lot of what Erin said. I think that one of the reasons that I started running for office in this particular office was because I thought how important our public engagement is and how important it is that we have transparency within our local government. The city council position is the closest to a government body that any of us have access to. Similarly, I have all of my cell phone information and personal information and spend several evenings either chatting or texting with people regarding questions that they might have. And I promised people that I would be available, and I will continue to be available. The other thing is that we have a lot of different ways to access our community members and to have community members be able to access us through social media, through a variety of different mediums that we can have information out to our constituents, and we need to continue doing that. The other part of that question was about data. Is that the second part of the question? How we were going to use the data. I think that that is a very important question. There are a lot of times that we've seen within government that we have the numbers, or just the studies or the numbers, but we're not using them in an effective way. And it is important to make sure that we're learning and using the data that we have in a way that makes sensible decision-making process. So we need to make sure that, and in fact, I was just talking with somebody at the Pioneer Park Coalition, and we'll talk about that later.
Thanks. So yes, I think it's important that we listen, and we make ourselves available, but we also have to reach in and hear those softer voices that aren't speaking up. If you look at voter turnout, for example, we have 14,000 voters in the neighborhood, and about 4,000 voted in the primary, I think, in our district. Similar numbers across the city. So there are lots of folks who aren't speaking up, and I think it's incumbent upon a representative to reach in and listen to those softer voices who either don't know, are incapable, or maybe they don't know how. And so I think that's something that will be very important to me, is being in the neighborhoods, being on the streets, and seeking out those voices that aren't being heard now. Second, with data, yes, we have to use it both to inform decision making, but also to make sure that the outcomes that we promised constituents are actually happening. That transparency of outcome, I think, is very important in connecting government to people.
Okay, and then a follow-up to that question is, people only get involved when they are angry. How did you keep them engaged all the time? All right, so we'll start with Erin.
We can't control people's desire to participate, but we sure can cultivate it and foster it. A lot of people's entrance to politics, I think comes because they were upset about something, and I know that mine did. I remember holding my newborn baby during an inversion day when I was hearing on the radio that I shouldn't go outside, and I heard a presentation, a piece of it on NPR about to our legislature about that living in our valley takes 2 years off of a person's lifespan just from the cumulative effects of being exposed to that pollution. It's irreproachable. How can you decide to live here and not do something about that? And that's what got me involved. But I think that there's a pivoting point where you decide to either work against the system or try to change the system by working within it. And that's how I try to help people who come to the community council meetings or call me or email me and perhaps have some misinformation to make that clarity, but really to get to what their true desire is. I hear that you're upset. I understand why you're feeling this way. What are you really trying to accomplish? What would you like me to know most of all? And then we have something to work with. And I will tell you, there are people who participate now more regularly than the first time they showed up angry. And there's faces in this audience who have been hot-tempered at times, but who have moved the needle with that. I think it's
Thank you, Erin.
not all bad. Thanks.
Well, I think that one of the ways that we can keep people engaged, people do show up when they're angry, generally because that means that something has affected them personally. That in some way a policy or something that has changed within the government has made an impact on their daily lives. And that is when people tend to voice their concerns, and that's what government is about. A way to continue keeping people engaged is to show that the government or the body that they are trusting with their concerns are actually listening and making that change. Once I think that people can see that you have their back, right? That you've listened to them and you're making that change and you're making sure that they're being heard, then they can have more trust within that government body. And once a person has trust in another person or in a government body, then they want to continue being a part of that. There's that buy-in that one will get when they realize that the person that is there, that they've addressed a concern with, actually listens and trust, and they can trust that person. And as we continue to move forward with people bringing their concerns and showing that we as a government or we as a city council or me as a person cares about you and you can trust me, then I think people will stay engaged.
This was slated as a debate, but I think you'll find a lot of agreement in some of the comments we make. That's exactly, I would echo Amy's comments, that we have to be able, through integrity, which is doing what we say we will do, we have to be able to help turn anger into constant participation. And I think not only the attitude that we have, but also proving that we're doing what we say we're going to do, again, with good data and openness and transparency. That's what's going to help have people continue to be engaged. I'd also push back a little bit that the only time people participate is in anger. Go to the Sugar House Community Council meeting, for example. See the trustees who are devoting a lot of time, not out of anger, but out of commitment. So I think looking at those good examples of folks who are engaged in their community can also inspire people to continue to be engaged even after that impulse to engage is gone.
Would you repeat the question, please?
So it seems that people might only participate when they get angry. How do you keep people involved and engaged all the time?
In my opinion, the way I do it is I put out a blog, georgechapman.net, and update it at least every week, and I try to give people news about what's going on that the newspapers don't cover. Newspapers and the reporters, who I respect, often miss a lot of stuff that's important for all of us, and it's important that you understand that. I am hoping that with that information, people will become more interested in being involved and recognizing we can change the system. I actually fight for a lot of these issues at the legislature, with the city council, the county council, and I have enough success that I believe that anyone can actually help on this. I have a problem with my opponent, though, saying things like, well, she was against the unanimous city council citing of the shelter in Sugar House. She was against it, but the city council members are saying it was a unanimous agreement. When you hear that, that discourages public engagement. People don't know what to think. I have a problem with that. I think people should be more open. We should have more open city council meetings, no more secret meetings. They just had one last week or a couple of weeks ago, and nobody really knew about it until it was released or acknowledged a couple of days ago. That's an issue. That's why I want more people to know what's going on.
Thank you all. We're going to move on to our second question that was pre-asked. And just letting you all know, after we do 5 of the pre-asked questions, we will move on to audience questions. So the second question is, I feel that Salt Lake City takes on an inordinate responsibility with regards to the homeless population. What can and should the City Council do to draw in commitment and partnership from outside Salt Lake County into the process of protection and reduction of homeless population? We will start with you, Amy.
Well, that is incredibly accurate. Salt Lake City does take on the majority of the burden in addressing our populations that are experiencing homelessness. What we need to, however, that said, the state has gotten on board with understanding that we do have an issue in access to resources and understanding that we need to have a full-body partnership throughout our state in order to address these issues. I think what the City Council can do, and what I think they have already worked very hard at doing, is creating those partnerships by educating others outside of our city about what our city faces on a daily basis in trying to provide access to people who are experiencing homelessness. I think the unfortunate part is that When we talk about people who are experiencing homelessness, we tend to talk about one tiny group that is the criminal activity group, if you will. And there is a lot more going on in those communities and a lot more that we need to be educating other people about so that we can create partnerships that are effective and that are providing resources for those people who desperately need resources. Again, we're only looking in that criminal justice part of one tiny aspect of the whole spectrum and the whole community. So that's really what we can do as a city council, is start to educate people about what's needed.
Thank you.
I think this idea of unity between the council and the mayor, the city and the state, the city and the county is extremely important, not just on homelessness, but on every issue we face. None of these issues that we'll talk about tonight can be solved alone. With homelessness in particular, I think you see an acknowledgement of the fact that we do have to work together with Operation Rio Grande, where city and state and county are working together there. Ultimately, I think that will be proven effective or not if the people actually get the help kind of in phase 2 that they need and expect. And that's something where I think the city can especially work on, is making sure that access to mental health and addiction recovery resources are made available to those folks.
This is the same problem we've had 4 years ago. Many of us, including myself, blame Ralph Becker for ignoring the homeless problem. And I've been fighting since then, not just with the state to encourage healthcare expansion, because it's a public safety issue. I think I've had a few op-eds about that. But the county has been ignored, unfortunately, and that's the issue. The city council and the mayor, unfortunately, ignored the county responsibility for public safety and mental health treatment and jail beds and DA prosecutors for 4 years, to the point where former Senator Steve Urquhart said drugs are essentially illegal in Salt Lake County. That's a problem, and that's helped make the situation much worse. In addition, Salt Lake City Council has been going around in circles trying to figure out how to work an affordable housing plan, and they have several vacant buildings they could have turned over to developers, sold to developers, used the funds for better things, and just said, okay, developer, put in 10%, 20% affordable, and everything would have been fine. We would have had 1,000 more units in the last couple of years, and we don't have them now. We're still going around in circle with that. So the homeless problem, essentially, in my opinion, has been ignored by the city council for the last 4 years. And I have a problem with that. I think our communities are now being invaded by these homeless criminals, addicts, and that's what we've been fighting for the last 4 years.
If I know anything in the last 4 years, it's that coming out fighting at every meeting doesn't actually solve any problems. There are a lot of times that we need to stand up for what is right and what is clear, thanks to the conversations we have as a community, but thanks to the data that we have too. The collective impact process that the county has spearheaded is what created the impetus behind 9 different subpopulations, and the fact that we should be serving those subpopulations more accurately in the resource centers, splitting up those resource centers. That kind of data, which collective impact is a process used on all sorts of ingrained, long-standing issues. We're using it here for homelessness as a county, is a process that we should insist continues. The basics of it is you talk about what your outcomes are and you're very clear about them. Then you draw a line to the processes and the programs that are going to fulfill your outcomes. And from the programs, you connect it to the money. If you aren't meeting your outcomes, which you're constantly tracking, then you address the programs. And if the programs can't be adjusted, then you adjust the money. It's so clear compared to the way that we have operated previously. And we need to make sure that this data and this tracking continues, because that's transparency. That's working together with our county partners. And I'll take swings for our city when I need to, but I'll tell you, fighting does not build the bridges that we need to have the partnerships talked about in this question. We have an opportunity with the state being at the table that we have never had before, and punching at them constantly isn't going to solve this problem.
Okay, just a reminder to you all, you can submit postcards with questions up to the front. I'd recommend, or you can stand up and ask a question. Just please repeat it loudly if you'd like to. But again, we'll get to audience questions after we finish the 5 pre-submitted questions. Okay, and then moving on to the third question. What is your plan to make the city-owned golf courses self-sustaining, or at least not major loss proposition? Abe.
Just say that one more time.
What is your plan to make the city-owned golf courses self-sustaining, or at least not major loss proposition?
I haven't thought about that much. As I've knocked on doors in the neighborhood, people have predominantly talked about homelessness, infrastructure, investment, and air quality. Golf hasn't come up much. I don't have a plan to make golf courses self-sustaining. I don't know. But I know that as we look at data, as we work with city employees to come up with plans to make them profitable, we can do it.
Golf courses are one of the fights that I've been involved in, so I do know this issue. Salt Lake City Public Utilities charges water fees for golf courses, parks, and other open space for Salt Lake public spaces much higher than any other city and county in Utah. It is ridiculous, to the point where this last year, the hottest summer on record, they stopped watering the cemetery until they got an inundation of complaints. After a month, they started watering again. They were told that we didn't have any more water or money for watering the median trees around the city until they got a lot of complaints. But the issue is Salt Lake City Public Utilities. Now, I contend that the golf courses are not making money because Salt Lake City Public Utility overcharges golf courses and public parks and open space much higher rates than everybody else. They charge them almost as if they're a single-family home, and it doesn't make sense. Salt Lake City Public Utilities, I have a big problem with. They're responsible for the watershed, but they actually fight to stop restrooms from going into the canyons. They turn off the water for the restrooms before Labor Day. And they spend $10 million on sweetheart deals for attorneys instead of spending it on conserving canyonlands. I have a problem with Salt Lake City Public Utilities. That's the solution for golf courses.
We have been kicking the golf issue around this city for way too long, and the Salt Lake City Council and the previous administration frankly has PTSD from going through all of the golf debates and data and studies and more studies, and let's redo that study and let's have more public hearings. We've had a lot of thought about this, and the truth is, part of all of that was let's wait and see. Maybe golf will recover. The truth is that Salt Lake City golf courses are used at the same rate as other golf courses everywhere else in the country. Golf is on the decline. It's on the decline, people. And actually, our use is right on par. No pun intended, really. It just gets too easy with the golf. The fact of the matter is we have too many golf courses than the fund can sustain. We have an enterprise fund, which means that the fund needs to sustain itself. We don't contribute, although we have recently, thanks to the mayor's request, general fund money, your tax dollars, to sustain the golf courses. And that's because less than 10% of our city residents use the golf courses, and you have to pay to be on the golf courses. So to throw them in with the parks, as was proposed by the mayor in the last budget, is a ridiculous notion to me. When we study our residents' desires, it's increased recreation, increased trails. We have one regional park, it's Liberty Park. The county runs Sugar House Park. If anything, we want another park and we want more places to play and be outside with our dogs. That's the conversation we need to have.
Okay, so District 7 has 3 golf courses in it, and so it is an issue. And I think there are a couple of things that we can look at, and I'm sure that, as Erin has mentioned, there have been studies after studies and debate after debate regarding golf courses. When I first started running, I decided to research this issue as well. Using secondary water to water our golf courses would be one way that we can conserve water that we drink and also be able to water the golf courses. It would be very expensive to change over to secondary water, but in the long run, it could actually be part of the solution. The other thing is to make, and Norway does this beautifully, but to make multi-use golf courses. There's a way to have open space that everyone can actually enjoy. And to be frank, we can see this over at the Bonneville golf course. There is a trail that runs right through there, and as far as I know, not too many people have died from a stray golf ball. I don't golf at Bonneville very often, that's why. But there are ways to actually create a multi-use golf course where, and if you go to Forestdale in the wintertime, you will see people cross-country skiing out there, you will see people with their dogs out there. If we continue to promote this multi-use, then I think there is actually a way to create a place where everybody feels like they're kind of winning at this.
Okay, so what are the issues that are affecting Salt Lake City residents that aren't in the newspapers and aren't being talked about? George.
Talk about issues that are not being talked about.
Not in the newspapers, not reading about, yeah.
That's one of the reasons I have my blog, GeorgeChapman.net. There's a lot of stuff on there that newspapers aren't reporting. It took a couple of months for today's paper. Lee Davidson actually reported on UTA may have some of this stuff taken away. I reported on it 2 months ago in the blog. Hepatitis A, we have 33 people. It's related to the San Diego outbreak. It seems to be slowing down. I started reporting on it a month before the rest of the news started pushing on it. It is embarrassing, but it's stuff that needs to be considered. If you have any interfacing with homeless, you should be getting a hepatitis A shot. There's a lot of news that's not being put out there, and I do everything I can to push the news to report some of this stuff, and that's one of the reasons for the blog. Again, part of the reason is it's very difficult to get some of this information out. As you know, I put in grammar requests, and I get fought on a lot of it. They fight, Salt Lake City Council and administration actually fight more for grammar than UTA now. UTA is more open than Salt Lake City Council. I have a problem with that. So the news needs to report more, but the government needs to be more open. And I don't see that in Salt Lake City.
Thank you, George.
No.
Okay, I'm going to try to be concise. I thought of 3 things, and I know I'm going to run out of time. So the first one is the Transit Master Plan, which we just had a public hearing on again on Tuesday night. Not a lot of people are talking about it. I ran on this 4 years ago that I was going to push it through. It's complete now, and the cool part of it is basically circulator buses. It looks at our residents' transportation needs. It drew lines on the map where we go, not where people coming into the city go, and it identified those bands of need. And that's where it's proposing to put buses that work better for us and more regularly for us and later at night for us than they do currently for us. So we need to have more input on that one. I want to talk about environmental issue, which is how do we achieve our city's really aggressive and appropriate carbon reduction goals? They're completely appropriate. They are the most aggressive that they've ever been, and sometimes in the state compared with Park City. The thing is, how do we get there? We can say we want to have these get down to zero on carbon. We just did a feasibility study that showed us how we can do it in an affordable way, and now we get to hold the feet to the fire with Rocky Mountain Power when we renegotiate our franchise agreement every 5 years. This is amazing. Nobody's ever done this before. We're doing it. The third thing is human trafficking. State Street and North Temple are, you know what they are. They've been that way for 40 years, and where the human trafficking survivors are being trafficked has changed over time, but that's basically where they are.
Thank you, Erin.
No, I'm done.
So I was sitting here thinking about this when George and Erin were talking, and all of the issues I came up with were things that people, I think, are generally talking about and we've kind of mentioned. And then I realized that one of the things that we're not talking about that is the sort of a byproduct maybe of the homelessness issue that everyone really is talking about is our criminal justice reform system, or rather the fact that we haven't looked at how to reform our criminal justice system. And it's something that I am incredibly passionate about, which I bet you couldn't guess given what I do for a living. But I just read an article that in California, Central California has reduced recidivism rate by 50% in 4 years. That means we're not seeing more people in jail, and we're not seeing people go back and commit more crimes. And there are really simple solutions to this that we need to be thinking about. They're re-entry programs. Many people who are in our criminal justice system don't have the foundation that a lot of us have, and so they don't know very simple things. We need to be providing re-entry programs for people who have found themselves within the criminal justice system. There are other little things that we can do that would actually help people get out of the system and into creating really successful paths for themselves and becoming awesome members of society that we want them to be. I see too many young people in our criminal justice system right now that feel like they have no hope. But if we as a society and a community started to actually talk about what that looks like, that people aren't really criminals, they just do stupid stuff, and how do we educate them, that's it for now.
It does. I was writing them down and had to cross them off every time someone said something. The one that still remains is, for me, is infrastructure investment. We talk about some things like, hey, the streets are torn up, but I don't see people talking about the actual numbers. It costs something, for example, with city streets in the mid-30s, $30 million a year to maintain our city roads. We're not putting $30 million a year into that maintenance. We're putting dozens of millions. And that's been going on for years and years. And so this deficit of infrastructure maintenance, I think, is extremely important. I don't see that in the newspapers. We talk about some of the effects of it, and we hear about that on the doorsteps, but we're not talking about kind of prioritizing that maintenance, how we're going to fund it. I'm excited to see the street. There's a street study that will be coming out sometime. It's promised this fall, Erin. My city council,
It comes from the mayor.
Okay, well, we're waiting on the street study to know how to prioritize those, but that's something I'm extremely interested in, and I hope people will talk about more, is that infrastructure investment in maintenance.
Okay, we're going to move on to our last pre-asked question, and then we will be moving on to audience questions. So again, I encourage you to send them up to our League of Women Voters and ask your questions, or again, you can just stand up to ask. So starting with Erin this time, how will you address and fund the backlog in SLC street maintenance and repair?
Good one. I like this one. This is a good one. I actually have been talking about this a lot at the community council meetings. Abe is pretty right. We need to be funding at about $36 million a year. We did $8.5 million this year. We did about $8.5 million the year before that. Since the 2008 recession, everything was cut, and streets has not recovered to the extent that it needs to. Streets, our infrastructure, are just like our bodies. If you wait until you have the heart attack, it's a lot harder to get healthy. We now have a very long time of deferred maintenance, and the reality is that we need $28 million we don't have every year. So we are talking about, the reality is new money, people. Here I am running for re-election and talking about the reality that we don't have enough money, and we're gonna have conversations actually this year, before this council body is finished with its work, about how we want to fund that as a society. And we're going to be coming to you and asking you, what do you want to do? So I will tell you that there's something called a transportation utility fee that we're looking at. Provo did this, Highland, I believe, has one, and other cities around the nation do it. You've got a street lighting fee, a sewer fee, and these cities have added a transportation fee. That's an option, and the beauty that we liked about it is that some cities assess it to every property. 43% of the properties in Salt Lake City are non-taxable schools, churches, state-owned building, things like that. This would be assessed all over.
Well, I think Erin hit it right on the nail right on the head. We do need to find a way to have new money come in and be able to fund these projects. One of the things that I've been thinking about as well are the community impact fees that developers are required to pay as they continue to do new developing. I'm sure if you've heard any of my speeches ever before, you've heard me talk about my wonderful Saturday night where I read every statute and every city ordinance as it relates to community impact fees. And they are, it's incredibly, for a legal nerd like myself, it is incredibly interesting because I can see how the state statutes and our city ordinances are almost somewhat contradictory with one another. And we need to be able to reassess those impact fees so that we're actually putting that money where it needs to go, which is within our infrastructure. There's all these loopholes that you can kind of get around those things, and so we need to kind of start to look at how we can actually have developers who want to be a part of our communities start to actually be a part of our communities in updating our infrastructure and being a part of it in that way. And I think that's one way we can start to look at how we get this, a lot of new money that we need.
Exactly right. We've got to have the money to do this. We don't have enough. Erin knew the numbers precisely. Two things I would look at on the council. One is the utility fee, and Erin explained that one. The second one is we have a resident population of about 192,000 people in Salt Lake. That population doubles during the daytime. We need to look at, and those in-commuters are not all coming in on Front Runner. They're using our roads. They're also using some other public services. And we need to look at ways to be able to capture some value there. I think that's really important. We double our daytime population, and so we have to be able to capture some value there. So those are two things that I would specifically look at, is capturing some value from in-commuters, and second, looking at the utility fees.
Okay.
4 years ago,
Oh, sorry.
4 years ago, the Salt Lake City Council increased taxes to pay for streets maintenance, $8.4 million. Unfortunately, the next year, my opponent in the City Council cut the street maintenance fee in half. And I have a problem with that. And now we're in the situation where we're way behind. The studies do show we need at least $40 million a year to keep our streets basically maintained. I don't think the City Council should again raise taxes or fees without a vote of the public. Do I think it's justified? Yes. But I have a problem with increasing taxes that they keep doing without going to the public. They did it for the lighting fee, and they keep raising the rates. And once that fee is opened, or approved, they can keep raising the rates without going to the voters. I have a problem with that. There's a reason why the Salt Lake City Public Safety Building had to go through 2 votes of the public. The public should have a say on this. Do we need more streets maintenance? Yes. Did the Salt Lake City Council abrogate the responsibility in keeping the streets maintained? Yes. But I want the voters to have a say in this, and I think I should be able to justify it. And if the council can't justify it to the voters, we shouldn't have it.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that, George. So, Erin, we're taking our first question from the audience, and again, please send them up if there are more. We'll be going until time, which is 8:30. What are your priorities for making transit more rider-friendly? And how will you hold UTA more accountable to taxpayers?
I think I'll start with the latter part. Salt Lake City does not have any authority over UTA, except that we are their biggest piece of their rider system. And when you can find that in their presence in our transit master plan. They were very happy to participate in the funding of the study, the master plan study, because they really like us to pick them to be the transit provider when we get to the point of buying up service. I think that how we get around our city is already an issue, but it's going to become even more of an issue as we double our Wasatch Front population. We are set to increase our citywide population by about 30,000 people. And you know, these traffic complaints and parking complaints, we will never build our way out of this. I'm not in support of widening our roadways in Salt Lake City, and the reality is if we don't build public transit that people are going to use that's more affordable and more convenient than getting in your car, we lose. The transit system loses. And the reality of UTA is they are nowhere on the horizon going to bring us a system that is more convenient and more affordable on their own time. That's where the Transit Master Plan comes in, and it will mean money from Salt Lake City in order for us to say, this is when the transit system, this is where it goes, this is how often it goes, and this is how late we want it to go. We control it. Cities like Boulder, Colorado does that. And that's the direction we need to head in.
Thank you.
That feels like an electric shock over here. It's funny that Erin brought up Boulder, Colorado, because I was just looking at the master transit plan today, as a matter of fact, and looking at how Boulder, Colorado runs their city, and they have this awesome transit system, the hop, skip, and jump, right? So you have different sizes of mass transit, if you will, for different areas. So for example, this is a big issue in Sugar House because we have tiny streets like 9th and 11th and 13th and 21st and all these different areas. But there are ways to have mass transit running and connecting through Sugar House that isn't, I guess, too inconvenient for drivers, but it actually will increase ridership because people say, oh, I know that I'm going from 21st and 21st down to maybe 11th and 9th, and I'm going to hop, that's where Boulder gets this, on this cute little bus that will take me there, and I don't have to, I can go to Smith's or Whole Foods or wherever, and then head back to 21st and 21st. Then if I am actually headed from Sugar House to the U, you're using a different type of transportation. You're using, as in Boulder does, sort of their skip, so you're having a longer commute that way. And I think that that is part of what the master transit plan is kind of looking at, is these different types of buses or trains or trolleys or whatever would fit within that community so that people are actually wanting to get onto that mass transit and use public transportation instead of their vehicles to move around our city and to be connected.
I think if you take a look at the draft master transit plan that just came out, it's fascinating. Please go check it out. One of the things that happens though is that it's very much designed to help get people in and out of the city. It's not focused on getting people around the city. If I look in District 7, for example, the whole east side is not enveloped in any of the bubbles that are within appropriate distances from transit stations. So that's one, is I think we need to look really carefully on a city basis, connecting residences and neighborhoods with areas of economic opportunity within the city, and not only rely on UTA's assessment of how to get people effectively in and out of the city.
Mass transit is one of my pet projects. I go to most of the UTA board meetings, and I want better mass transit service. But the future of mass transit in Salt Lake City is buses. It's the only way we can really financially fund better mass transit. When buses stop in this area around 9 o'clock, it discourages mass transit use. My opponent and the city council want to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, almost $1 billion in new projects, believing that that will increase ridership. And I have a problem with that. My opponent also wants to send a TRAX train up 11th East. I have a problem with that. That's $100 million out of your pocket. That $100 million could provide 50 new bus routes around Salt Lake City and better late night service, which essentially stops now at 9 o'clock. It doesn't make sense when you have an entertainment district in Sugar House in downtown and you can't get out of there after the theater gets out. It is wrong. But spending hundreds of millions of dollars instead of spending $10 million to get a better bus system that can run every 15 or 10 minutes, it doesn't make sense, and Salt Lake City Council is trying to do it without a voter approval. They're trying to spend that money without going to the voters to see what you want. I have a problem with that.
I started, didn't I?
Yes, yeah.
So we actually get to debate though, because I really would love to debate right now.
Yeah.
We can?
Yes.
I can retort? Oh, jeez, this is great. Salt Lake City Council is nowhere near spending the money that the mayor's master transit plan draft that is before us is, there isn't even a dollar amount, a specific dollar amount associated with the plan that is before us. There is rail proposed in the central business district downtown in a loop fashion that would take people from the intermodal hub basically through the downtown, and you could go back to the intermodal hub. There's nothing very convenient there right now. But the phased approach to the transit master plan is buses. So the council's not trying to spend the money that my opponent says that we are. And if we ever do, there will definitely be some public hearings on
Can
that.
I answer?
We could go back and forth all night.
Oh, yes, we can. This is good. Actually, I do appreciate Erin does have her opinion. I just disagree with it. Erin has been pushing with the city council on more rail projects, especially on the tracks line. And Erin is famous for saying, let's put a head on the snake, with referring to the head on something. With extending the Sugar House streetcar up 11th East. That's a track strain. That removes all parking if you do it. That's $100 million, and that's a problem. Salt Lake City Council recently wanted to spend an extra $100 million, $50 million on the airport tracks. They also have a downtown streetcar east-west on 1st and 2nd South. They want to do a downtown streetcar north-south on 400 West. They want to do a black line from the University of Utah to the airport or to Central Station. That's almost $1 billion, plus the BRT at $50 million a mile. I know this stuff. That's a problem. The Transit Master Plan does say, let's focus on bus service first. I appreciate that, but when they got to the council kept pushing for more rail. And they said, quote, we're disappointed we don't have more streetcars in here. That's a problem. That's going to be coming out of your pocket. Your turn.
Sorry, we're actually going to move on. Okay, for Amy.
Yes.
How do you plan to, well, for all of you, but starting with Amy, how do you plan to support the Dreamers and undocumented community in your district? Do you agree or disagree with the Trump administration decision to rescind DACA?
If I start to cry, I apologize. And no, I don't agree with the Trump administration's decision to get rid of DACA. I think that DACA has been, over the last almost decade, one of the greatest administrative decisions that was put into place. I think that we, and I will speak slightly anecdotally on this. I mentioned earlier that I came from an organization, an event from an organization that I started. 2 years ago, we were able to give a young undergrad from the U a $1,000 scholarship, and then we gave it to her again this year to get to law school. She is a dreamer, and it is frightening for her to think that she may not go to law school or be able to be a part of our community. And she's one of the greatest people I've ever met. She's way better than I could ever hope to be. And I don't know how we fix it except stand up against that horrible decision to take away the opportunities of really amazing people that deserve to be here and be a part of our communities.
I mean, if we look at America and we look at Utah, I mean, this is a place of immigrants and folks who've come to make a better life. And when we speak about dreamers in DACA, I mean, we should not be holding, I'll get emotional too, folks accountable for things other people did. So that's one. Two, how on the city council to deal with that, I don't know. But we should be fostering policies that are in the city that make sure that everybody who's here feels valued, that everybody here has opportunity, and that everybody feels part of this community.
I don't know what Trump is thinking of on DACA. I support young immigrants. I think immigrants in general make our country better. I've had immigrants, undocumented immigrants, working for me. They actually allowed me and my company to hire 20 new American citizens. These are technical people, but even a regular person without a higher degree has to help our country because they allow us to, I mean, they work harder. In my experience, I've had a lot of immigrants working for me, and they work harder. It isn't exclusive to them, it's just that I have a problem if I'm not going to hire somebody who works hard. And I came out of the tech industry. Unfortunately, we have a problem with immigration law in our country. We should open it up more. I have a problem when we have to hire somebody with a technical degree that's the best in the world, and instead of taking them to our country, we have to send them to Canada and hire a couple of hundred Canadians to support him. I have a problem with that. I don't know what the heck Trump was thinking. I think young immigrants are going to be good for this country.
I'll steal a line from George and say I have a problem with Donald Trump. I agree with all of us here at the table tonight. I'm a second generation immigrant, and my mother was born just off of the boat, literally, and that's what regular people are in America. We are all some degree removed from the boat and some other land or another nation attached to us. We are great because of that. And the racism and discrimination, the sexism is an abomination. And cities can wield axes on this. On Tuesday, we passed the Indigenous Peoples Day as a Salt Lake City Council. Columbus Day is a federal holiday. We're not touching Columbus Day. We're adding a layer of recognition that has been ignored by the white centrism that we perpetuate by doing nothing when we do nothing. One way that I've worked on the City Council to empower and recognize leaders, create leaders in the young dreamers in our country, in our city, actually in our county too, is back at the beginning I asked our fire department, what are your recruitment numbers like for women? And basically they're abominable. And they looked into their department. They were very introspective, and they said we could do better at recruiting young women, and particularly women of diversity. And we've created that program. It's called Camp Athena.
Okay, and then Abe, do you think the city should change the traffic flow in 2100 South between 1300 East and 2100 East, or add more bike lanes and room for non-vehicle traffic?
I think this has already been decided. Here's the principle that I would follow in making that decision if it came up again. One, I really appreciated how the administration, that was a decision that had already been budgeted for by the City Council. There were several options available and multiple traffic plans. And whether you look at the circulation study, the Sugar House circulation study, or any the Parley's Way plan, there were lots of options there. And the administration has a budget to do what they were going to do. I appreciated how the administration came out into the communities, came to community council meetings, and opened up forums to get input on that. And I think that's a principle that we need to be following every time we make decisions, is getting input from the community.
Landon, don't go away. You're going to listen to this. I am against reducing traffic lanes for bike lanes when the congestion increases and air pollution increases. Every project that goes through the city that reduces traffic lanes should have an analysis to see if air pollution increases. In the 21st South proposal, that analysis that was missing from a lot of the discussion is anything that approaches 20,000 average daily trips a year, historically and through many studies, there is a significant increase in congestion and air pollution increases. That's the problem with the 21st South road diet. I am against road diets if they increase air pollution. I know 21st South is a problem, but the solution is not to increase air pollution.
So this was a mayor decision, as Abe has said. The city council put the money there to make the changes and let the administration communicate with the citizens about what kind of a change do you want to see. There is one piece though that's policy that the council has set, which is the Complete Streets Ordinance, which requires consideration when a major road overhaul happens of inclusion of bike lanes and alternative forms of transportation. And there are questions amongst some council members about whether or not that ordinance was followed. The 21st South road proposal is not in my district, and I know that there have been some very strong opinions about that. My perception is that there are very strong opinions about trying to build our way out of commuter traffic as our population increases, or saying we do need to transition incrementally away from single occupant vehicles. We have to think about getting away from driving everywhere by ourselves in our cars, and it does mean working at the same time, working in parallel with a transit master plan that actually starts to serve us and our needs. We can't think of these things in isolation. So I can't say that I have an opinion on the mayor's decision. I do agree that it was a good public process that happened. And I think she listened to the loudest voices in that public process, but there is a policy that has to be followed, and there's a good reason for that. Any study you look at around the world will tell you you can't build your way out of traffic.
So I'm a big proponent of the Complete Streets policy. I think that, as was mentioned a little bit earlier by Erin, I believe, and something that I actually was speaking with some people at the kind of beginning of all of this, is that we sort of, here in Salt Lake City and in Utah, we are addicted to vehicles. We have a car culture. And the more that we are convenient, and this is not to say that, you know, everything should then turn the other way to the other extreme of only having bikes and pedestrian walkways, but that these need to be considered, and we need to start looking at these complete streets so that people are more encouraged to take public transit, or more encouraged to ride their bikes, or more encouraged to walk. And certainly we've talked a little bit about this, there's all of these different components that weigh into that. What happened on 21st and 21st, I think, again, I agree that the mayor she listened to the people who are affected there. I don't really drive on 21st and 21st, and so when I would talk to constituents about this, I would ask them for their opinion. My opinion, if there was something to happen on 27th, which is where my driveway is, I would certainly have an opinion about that. But the process was, I think, the most part followed, and I guess the bottom line is I think we do need to start looking at how we encourage people to get out of their vehicles and into a more public transportation mode, or a bike mode, or alternative way from a vehicle. So yeah.
Thank you. Okay, and then for George. The Salt Lake City Metro Jail is running at max capacity. What solutions do you have to reduce? I can't read this word, but what solutions do you have to reduce iodine
I can
amounts?
take it from there.
Okay.
Oh boy, can I take it.
In the Salt Lake City correction system.
Okay, Salt Lake City Jail, Salt Lake County Jail is not at capacity. 380 beds at Oxbow are still not being used. Part of the reason is Salt Lake County Mayor Ben McAdams has refused to adequately fund public safety. So for instance, 2 years ago, he took the $9.4 million jail bond for the new jail and repurposed it for other stuff. And that's a problem that's been existing for the last 4 years. Little by little, downtown Rio Grande area has gotten worse and worse because police, for 4 years that I know of, have not been able to keep drug dealers in jail for more than a few hours. And last year, it's been so bad, the jail wasn't funded. It wasn't the sheriff's fault. It was Mayor McAdams' fault with his budget. He wasn't providing enough adequate support. I have a really big problem right now because he didn't support adequately jail beds and prosecutors to keep the bad guys in jail and away from us and the homeless. Now Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, and Utah taxpayers are going to have to spend $67 million. Your taxes are going to go up. I'm pretty sure October 24th, when the mayor gives his budget, we're going to have a tax increase in the county because over the last 4 years, Mayor McAdams has refused to adequately fund a jail system that works. Again, 380 beds are not being used right now.
Thank you, George.
George, I'm going to agree with you that the county actually, when I recognize it, we've got to recognize it. So the county council and our county mayor make the funding decisions for the county jail. We don't operate a jail in Salt Lake City any longer, and there are lots of conversations in those relationships between the city and the county, I believe, that encourage more access to jail space. Our police department tells us that that's desperately what is needed. But as for recidivism, I don't believe that we jail our way into fixing people's problems. Jail, some people have told me who have spent a lot of time there and changed their lives that it's God's hospital. But truly it comes down to the human interactions and the social work components that reduce recidivism. So for example, there's an amazing nonprofit in District 5 on 2nd West that works with women coming out of incarceration. It partners them up with mostly LDS couples who are on missions. 4 months before they're released, they partner them up with legal defenders and start to work on what is their life going to look like when they get out. And they have seen, like many programs like this, incredible reductions in recidivism and people whose lives are coming back together. That's the kind of work we need to really address the chronic problems that we look at.
Thank you, Erin.
90 seconds is not enough time for me to address this. I'm going to talk really, really fast, and then if you want to talk out there, we can. So as I mentioned before, there are ways to reduce recidivism, and a lot of times the ways that these are to educate people while they're still incarcerated. First off, let me say that I don't think that we need more jail beds, and I don't think that jailing is the answer, because 95% of the people that we put in jail will get out. And that is the reality, right? And so what are we doing to make sure that people who do get out of jail are able to move forward in society? One of the things that we could really do, so easy and amazing, and I don't know why we don't do this, is that everyone who comes into jail, if they don't already have a Utah identification document, i.e., like a driver's license or your ID card, we should be issuing them. If you do not have an ID card, you cannot get a social security card, you cannot get a birth certificate, and then you can't get an ID card. And then guess what happens? You can't get a job, you can't get housing, you can't get medical, and then you end up on the streets without anywhere or anything to do. So you steal a bike, and then you steal a bike, and then you go back to jail. And this just keeps going over and over and over again. But there is a way to give somebody a quick, easy response. Here is an ID card. You are now a person that we recognize, and you now can go apply for a job. And then if you get that job, you can actually show them ID that you are a person that we recognize. It is such an easy way to make a step forward and have people actually feel that they belong in our community. So that's just one example.
Thank you.
There's lots more.
How do we reduce recidivism? First, this perspective comes from sitting in some addiction recovery groups over at Odyssey House, which were extremely helpful in understanding this for me. First, the city needs to continue to fund and expand these types of programs that help focus on addiction recovery. We don't necessarily have to provide them all ourselves, but we need to be working with good partners who can address people in a very individual and compassionate way. So that's first. Second, I heard a story of a woman who she had been arrested, she got put in jail, and she was put in some jail somewhere else in the county, not near her home. And then she got released at like 3 in the morning, and then she's just like standing outside on a street, nowhere to go, no one to pick her up. And again, this cycle continues. So making services available there at the jails was one of the recommendations that this group had. Making services available, and the city being not just a partner with people who provide services, but being an aggregator of those services and making them available to the people coming out.
Thank you. And George would like to say something. Do I have the okay?
Geez, thanks. I don't want to agree with Erin, but the problem is we do not have healthcare expansion. And Erin's absolutely right. People are in jail that shouldn't be in jail, and we don't have treatment for them. Salt Lake City Police, if they find somebody that is a threat to themselves or a threat to others, they have no other choice but to put them in jail. These are people who should be getting mental health treatment. And back in 2008, Salt Lake County cut mental health care budget significantly and gave it to a private company. We're nowhere near where we should be treating mental health issues. And 80% of jail inmates have mental health issues. So that's the problem. It's not the city's fault. It's Salt Lake County and the lack of healthcare expansion at the legislature's level.
Okay, Erin. The new Park Avenue development in the heart of Sugar House, where Shopko used to be, brings more apartments, more offices, and a 1,200 car parking garage. Is this too much?
Parking? Seriously, is that what you're asking? The whole development?
Well, yeah, about the whole development and how much it's bringing.
Again, District 7 is not my district. I don't go to the Sugar House Chamber of Commerce meetings, so I can't really presume to know exactly what the Sugar House Community Council thinks about it, and that's probably most important. But I know that Sugar House is our second downtown in Salt Lake City. I know that our citywide population has basically been stagnant for decades, while we've seen incredible growth in our other 15 municipalities in the county and all along the Wasatch Front. So we can resist growth, or we can accept it in the ways that work best for us. There's a lot of revenue coming in through these new developments in the city, but I think it's how we grow and how we work as community councils, really, with developers. Sugar House Community Council is one of the most productive and ELCO relationships with developers. They bring them in. I know you guys talk about, you've got a land use committee. That's how it should be. And people who show up to complain once the thing is approved, I hope that they figure out that they should actually be showing up at the community councils 6 months, 12 months earlier and having an impact there. So I can't tell you if that development is too much, but I bet the people in the community council can.
Well, and Erin, again, mentioned the Sugar House Community Council meeting and how active they are with the developers. I know that this particular project went through quite a bit of remodeling, if you will, after the developer would come to the Sugar House Community Council meeting and get feedback and take that back. And then they would go kind of, okay, well, that's not going to work. Let's come up with a new plan. And so it has evolved quite a bit. And a lot of that, I would say all of that, is because of the community, the Sugar House Community Council, and the input from communities from our community. It's also this development, if I understand from the last thing I saw, is bringing in a medical center, which I think is amazing for the Sugar House area, for access for our community members to have easier access to health care. And you know, I think that as we continue developing, we need to be looking at high density development around transportation hubs, so that because that affects sort of every other aspect of our lives, including climate change. So, well, we can see a lot of new apartments going up. If we're putting those in these high density areas where we're more walking to resources, then that's actually an okay thing. I don't know about the parking. I know it's going underground. That's all I know about that, really.
Yeah, this particular development had extensive engagement with the community. I was so impressed with how the developers came in, got yelled at, came back the next time, got yelled at, and kept coming back and working closely with the community. Second, density should probably be built near density and traffic hubs, and I think this is a good example of it. And not only is this development bringing some residential, but we're in the healthcare center, but also an office park in the middle. And so I think that will help drive some commerce down in the central business district and be ultimately good for the neighborhood.
This is another sore subject with me. That this adds to the super gentrification of Sugar House. The project in general is an improvement to what was there before. They did put underground parking, but they also have an 8,000 square foot limit due to a contract they signed with the Olsons that limited retail space. And I have a problem with that. We want a walkable community. We want to be able to park in Sugar House and walk around for 4 or 5 hours visiting shops. That requires ground floor retail and restaurants. But because of the agreement with the Olsons, that project is not going to have ground floor retail. And it's limited to 8,000 square feet. You can't do anything with 8,000 square feet. So all that area, all it's going to have in public space is 8,000 square feet. That is not walkable. That's a problem. And the 154 apartments that are being put in there, None are affordable. Salt Lake City Council, I believe, abrogated their responsibility when they should have been forcing all developers with over 10 units to place 10% as affordable. The Utah State Legislature gives them money to do a tax credit on it, but they don't make it they don't force it. So I have a problem with that project.
I'd like to take a second to do follow-up because we had some good feedback. I think that the Shopko wasn't the best use of that property, just in my own shopping opinion. A great ocean of parking is not Sugar House. That's not what I want any part of our city to look like. In fact, when I stand at the top of the tower of City Hall and I look down on the city, the only thing I'm disappointed about is all the parking lots. So I'm glad they're putting that parking underground. That's where it should be. But centric development, Amy is absolutely right. When we look at our plan for the Wasatch Front through the Wasatch Front Regional Council, we get to propose as governments and as people, I hope you participated, how centric we want to build. How much do we want to increase density around those critical transit and transportation nodes? And it's absolutely inextricably linked to air quality. So we should be building greater density and more diverse types of use. Actually, what we learn about this mixed use with retail on the bottom is that it's really difficult to keep those retail spaces filled. And sometimes a clinic is a better use. Offices may be a better use when they're mixed with housing above. So it's not always about putting little sandwich shops below, because frankly, the only thing worse than a doctor's office would be an empty building that you have to walk past all of the time. The last part is I want to remind you later, George, that you're in support of inclusionary zoning, because I have never heard you say that before. And we're going to get to the inclusionary zoning conversation as a council, which is where we could consider requiring developers, as George proposed, to build affordable housing to some extent in every project.
And Amy and Abe, just so you know, you can also debate if any of you can. So
We're only going to debate about our curling outfits.
okay, for Amy, what should the city's role be with sustainability and environmental issues, including air quality, and what do we use if plastic bags are bagged?
What do we use? What was that?
If we get rid of plastic bags.
Oh, what do we use if we get rid of plastic bags?
If we ban them.
Oh,
Is that plastic bags are bags?
So as far as the city's role in clean air and how we can have sustainability and impact, I'm actually going to take a note from a friend of mine who's here that one of the things that we could be doing is to affect, that the city itself could do to affect sustainability in our climate change, is convert our fleets from fossil fuels over to cleaner energy and cleaner fuels. And I love this idea. When I mentioned, my friend sort of gave me this idea and talked me through this, and we talked about it. This idea of leading by example. That's what our city can do as we move forward with impacting the climate and showing sustainability and working towards sustainability, is that if we can do it, so can you, right? And that is how a government can actually start to change that conversation as well. We are a city council, and our city governments are the example, and we should be the example. And there are ways to make these different changes that will increase our effect as public officials, changing our fleets over to cleaner energy and making these small, having incentive programs for city employees to take public transportation, looking at biking lanes. I know the city does do some of this already, of incentives for my time is up.
Thank you.
My talking getting slower as the time goes on, I think.
First on plastic bags, I've lived in multiple countries and cities where there were plastic bag bans, and we survived. So that's one. What can we do as a city? One, I think continuing to build both economic opportunity and residential density near existing traffic hubs is essential, and to not sprawl here in the city. So that's one. The second is we have to acknowledge that our airshed is not bound by like 5th East and Foothill and 21st South and 27th South. in District 7 or in the borders of Salt Lake. Our airshed is extensive. And so we have to really see ourselves as part of this whole ecosystem here along the Wasatch Front. And we're going to have to work very closely with the state to make that happen. Some of the tension we see between the city and the state, I think sometimes seems political in nature, and we're not actually solving problems. And so I think we need to really focus on how we can be more unified with our friends in the state legislature, perhaps speak more maybe on their terms and frame these issues not just in ecological terms or health terms, but also in economic terms. I think the impact of bad air on the economic development to our city and our county and our state is significant. And I think those are some tactics we can use to make sure that we're working together.
Well, like I said, I'm against bike lanes that increase air pollution, and invariably my city, unfortunately, pushes bike lanes even when it does increase air pollution. Here's a good example. The 300 South bike lane, separated bike lane cost almost $1 million between construction and maintenance, and they can't even maintain it. It's still a problem. And yet at the same time, instead of spending $10,000 to put a bike lane on Richmond Street, which has useless center turn lanes for most of Richmond Street, they won't do that. We've been trying for 10 years to get a bike lane on that. Look at Foothill. Foothill has a super wide center turn lane that doesn't make sense at all, and that's where they should be cost effectively putting in bike lanes. Salt Lake City Council and Mayor should be pushing for better traffic lights, because if you're going downtown, I hate driving downtown, I avoid it at all costs, but if you're going downtown, you could easily hit 5 or 10 traffic lights, red lights, every 2 blocks, because they have a center area for walking, and if you're in a red light there, you have to stop. That increases air pollution. I contend my city actually puts in projects that increase air pollution. I have a problem with that. They should be putting in smart lights that actually detect cars, bicyclists, pedestrians, and make a calculation on that. By the way, they're doing it in Redwood Road.
Thank you, George.
Okay, I'm only going to bite at one of those. Center turn lanes actually improve traffic flow. They reduce traffic having to stop because someone needs to make a turn. It improves traffic flow and it decreases air pollution. I just had to bite at that one. The other part about efficiency with lights, you were talking about traffic lights, but actually we have and are updating all of our street lights to way more efficient lights. I don't actually like the color of them, but that's another issue. We can do so much as a city. I already talked to you about our Rocky Mountain Power franchise agreement. People, I don't know if you get how big this is. Every city in the whole state and basically around the country has about quarter-century contract agreements that don't bind the power provider to do anything in terms of fulfilling their goals. We have flipped that on its head, and every single year we're coming back together with Rocky Mountain Power to measure our progress there. You have to look at the air quality pie of where our pollution is coming from, and our energy use is a big one. So Salt Lake City has and should continue to lead out in residential solar protection, which is about to get a lot harder on November 15th, but also installing solar fields for our own buildings. We don't build anything that isn't clean anymore. I represent you and our values on air quality on our state air quality board. I'm one of the 2 elected seats on that body. I've been there for about 3 years. I'm going to keep bringing the reality of air quality and the economic impact that it is to that body in the state and working through the channels that exist, because that's the only way we're going to get things done. And federal regulations are really the best thing that's ever happened. So right now we can just all hurt in our guts for the next 4 years at what isn't going to happen on the federal level. Thanks.
You want more?
No, so that wraps up our time. I think we're at 8:28 right now. If anyone has a question that they'd like to shout out from the floor, I think we have some time for that. Yes, go.
So,
and I think we only have time for one of you, so you might have to flip a coin.
Oh, come on.
My name is Annie. I am from District 5. What are you going to do about the Seven Canyons Fountain in Liberty Park?
Do you want to repeat it, Charlie?
Yeah, Salt Lake City should be repairing that and fixing it up. I agree that $200,000 should be the cost. I don't know where Parks came up with $2 million. But yeah, it's an amenity. I think Liberty Park is not funded sufficiently. Although the City Council, I'll give credit, I don't know if I have to Erin. They actually recently improved Salt Lake City Liberty Park with a new center area. So they're trying. I think Liberty Park is an amenity that deserves more attention. Right.
The Seven Canyons Fountain is one of those really unique pieces in our city that is both a piece of art and a place for us to play. And we don't have many things like that. I think it's real that 18 inches of water without a lifeguard is a law that we can't probably fix, but a bucket or two of cement might be able to fix that. We could decrease the depth of the water there. The other part is that we actually went to secondary water, like we talked about a little bit tonight at Liberty Park. So every night that we sprinkle, we drain that pond down, and then it's refilled by the aquifers down, way down in the earth. So when we're refilling, when we're drawing down the pond and sprinkling, we're kind of spraying duck poop all over, and we're refilling that Seven Canyons fountain with some poop-infested water. So those are little fixes. I agree that $2 million to say we're just closing it, it's going to cost $2 million was a pretty poor piece of public process that wasn't on the council side of things, and I'd like to see it fixed.
Erin, I'd call that fertilized water.
We all answering this because I think that, I mean,
Okay.
yes.
Can we get the little boy's question?
Yeah. To avoid rivalry, what's your question?
Okay, my question is, what are we going to do about illegal drug selling in District 5 and 7?
That is an excellent question, and I think we've kind of talked a little bit about it throughout today, but I will go ahead and agree with George on this one as well, that I think that we have to look at how we increase funding to our police officers so that we keep our seasoned and experienced police officers here in the city, because they help mentor our younger police officers. And when we have better police officers that are part of the fabric of our community, then we actually see a decrease in criminal activity throughout the community. So that police presence isn't just because somebody has a uniform on and they scare criminals into not doing something bad, but they actually become part of the community, as actually Detective Ashdown is one of our community members, and that begins to create a different environment for people where it's their community too, so they don't want to do something bad within that community. So we have to look at funding more police officers.
Yeah, we absolutely have to provide the police officers the funding that they need to patrol our cities and to keep us safe. The second thing, I think this is something in our culture that we have to watch out for. We have to remember that darkness doesn't like light, right? And so as we as neighbors are out on our porches, on our streets, in our parks, taking advantage of our neighborhood, those activities are going to go back into the dark, and we're going to capture that more with our light. And so I think those are two things we need to do. We have to, of course, fund law enforcement, but we can't turn into a law and order society. We have to make sure that we're using all these positive things about our neighborhood to keep the bad things at bay.
I agree with Amy that we do need more police officers. They need to be better paid. They're starting at 2 o'clock in the morning now to try and get the drug dealing out of parks and other areas around your area. We've also had a problem with the drug dealing and drug addicts near school bus stops. And fortunately, we've been able to convince the Operation Rio Grande Command Post to work on that. And also the Salt Lake City School District has actually been involved in that. So, for instance, there's a phone number at the very bottom of this card. It's Operation Rio Grande tip line. If you see any drug dealing related to the Operation Rio Grande issue, you'll find a faster response sometimes than the police can give you. In our case, we were able to stop the drug dealing at the school bus stop by calling them, and within a day or two, they had Utah Highway Patrol officers kicking them out. So we're working on it, the police are working on it, And Amy's right, we need to pay the police a lot more to encourage better public safety. The best deterrent to crime is a more visible police officer. And yes, we're losing 2 or 3 experienced cops a month, and that's a serious issue.
I will agree with you, George.
Oh no.
And Amy and Abe that, and I will tout one endorsement that I'm really proud of, which is the endorsement of our Salt Lake City Police Union. And I am working right now with Councilmember Luke of District 6 on a policy that would basically bind Salt Lake City to being able to hire the best in the state all the time. Right now we aren't, because our benefits are outweighed by about 8 other cities. We have the biggest issues in the city, and Oliver, you explained one of them. We have to be able to hire the best officers in the state. Anyway, and we, as a city council, we can't say how much they get paid exactly, but we can put money there when the administration asks for it. So we should have more officers, but the reality is the research shows we can't police our way out of those kind of shifts in the culture in the community. It's community building that changes it. So we need the officers, absolutely, but we need communities that are calling, that are talking to each other, that are reporting everything. Every single one of you with a phone in this room should have 799-3000 programmed into your phone. That's the police non-emergency number. You don't just have to wait till you see a drug deal. You call for any suspicious activity. We have a data-driven police force, and every 2 weeks they look at basically where all the calls are happening and where a big shift is happening in the city, and then they deploy resources there and they come back in 2 weeks. Could I just tag on my next 90 seconds and keep going?
I'm sorry, but we're actually going to have to wrap up. We've
Good question.
reached our time at 8:35. So thank you all for participating. Thank you for coming out. After this, though, you will all have an opportunity to talk to the candidates until 9. And also, you can go back and watch the debate on the East Liberty Park Council Organization Facebook page. Thank you to all the viewers.
And Amy's going to take a selfie of us with you. So stay in the picture.
George, get your phone out, George.
Yeah, okay, call you and tone it down. Come on.
Do any of you guys have a blog?